Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, black hair has been politicized, penalized, and legislated throughout history. As a bill addressing hair discrimination heads to the Illinois House, we'll break down the politics of black hair. A new WBEZ series examines how Chicago's institutions interact with its residents. The station's new host of Reset, Sasha-Ann Simons, joins us with more.
We are the engine that runs all things infrastructure throughout the city.
And we'll introduce you to the locally owned engineering firm helping oversee the CTA's overhaul of the red and purple lines. First off tonight, black Americans across the country are familiar with the rules that have been imposed on their hair throughout history. Styles traditionally associated with natural black hair like locks, braids, twists, and afros have been called everything from distracting to unprofessional in schools and workplaces, leaving many black Americans feeling pressure to style their hair in ways that conform with Eurocentric ideals. Now, a bill recently passed in the Illinois Senate aims to address black hair discrimination in schools across the state. Joining us now with more are Patrice Grell-Yursik, writer and creator of the beauty blog Afrobella; Ava Thompson-Greenwell, filmmaker, journalist, and professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism; and State Senator Mike Simmons, who introduced the bill and whose district includes neighborhoods on Chicago's far north side. All three of you, welcome back to Chicago Tonight, and thanks for joining us. So, Senator Simmons, let's start with you, please. What inspired you to propose this bill?
I've read so many stories in the last year or so of black youth who have been traumatized by being forced to take out natural hairstyles such as the style that I wear, dreads, freeform locks, braids. And the tipping point for me is when I read about Chet Hawkins, who's a 4-year-old on the west side of Chicago, who was excited to go to school, was excited about his new braids. His mom took him to school and he was forced to take out his braids, and it was a story about it in late March. I read that and said, I have got to take action on this. We need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
Ava Thompson-Greenwell, you've written about discrimination against black hair in the workplace, especially for black women. What does that look like?
So, there's a real history behind that, particularly in television news where image tends to be everything. And so we have Melva Tolliver, who back in 1971 wore her hair in an afro and was told, you don't look feminine, change your hairstyle. And she was defiant in that way, in that she decided that she was going to keep her hair the way it was. And so she was supposed to be covering a story on Richard Nixon's daughter's wedding and decided that she was going to wear her afro. And they said, no, you can't. And they actually deleted her portion. And so we have come a long way, certainly since the 1970s, but we still have a ways to go, I think. And it starts certainly with children being able to be themselves fully in school. So I'm very happy to hear about this legislation from Senator Simmons.
And you've even written about some more modern day instances, or similar, not quite the same thing, but modern day instances that still happens to, like you said, to some TV news reporters. Patrice Grell-Yursik, there is more legislation on the horizon regarding black hair. What would something like the Crown Act mean?
So the Crown Act stands for creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. It's been passed in California in 2019. 7 states have passed similar laws. And it means, a protection for us to not be discriminated against in the workplace and in schools. It's so important what Senator Simmons is introducing, and to see acts like this enacted across the country to protect our rights.
And Senator Simmons, how would this bill work?
So the bill, SB 817, would prohibit schools from including any discriminatory language on hairstyles traditionally associated with race and ethnicity, i.e. People whose hair is of African descent. So Specifically, the legislation says that you cannot discriminate against dreads, braids, afros, and protective hairstyles. So the enforcement strategy here is once a year, the Illinois State Board of Education will do a compliance audit of all schools in the state, and the handbooks will have to remove any language that would, say that you can't have those kind of hairstyles. And if they're not in compliance, then there would be consequences. The schools could potentially even lose their recognition by the State Board of Education.
And Senator Simmonds, you've said that this is something you've experienced personally as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a chronic thing I've experienced more so in my earlier years when I was a teenager. There was just always, the sense from authority figures, school settings, places like that, I would hear little random comments about my hair. I ran track and field. I remember I'd get it a lot from my people on the team, and the coach would just say the most inappropriate things. And back then, I kind of knew it wasn't right. I felt like a boundary was being crossed, but I didn't really have the language to name it. And I just want to say that, a big part of what I'm trying to do with this legislation, this is also about mental health, right? The pandemic has already besieged our youth to such a degree. The last thing we need to do is be policing hairstyles. We have much bigger fish to fry. And so, I know what it feels like to have authority figures humiliate and belittle you in front of your peers. As an adult, frankly, I've had instances where other adults have made inappropriate comments, or they'll reach out and they'll even touch one of my locks, which is entirely inappropriate. I always say if their mothers saw them doing that, their mothers would cringe. And that for me is usually the litmus test on that type of behavior and how unacceptable it is. And I don't know that any DEI consulting or cultural sensitivity is going to really fix that, right? If your mom would see that and say that and be embarrassed of that behavior, then that's a pretty obvious line that we shouldn't cross.
I think everybody in this conversation can relate to that experience. Ava, black hair, has a political and a cultural history, obviously. Can you give us some examples of that historical discrimination that we've experienced around our hair?
Well, certainly there have been women, particularly in law firms, in airline work, who have been discriminated, either not promoted or not offered the job because of the way they're wearing their hair. And so this is really affecting their livelihoods. Certainly it is affecting their mental health, as the senator mentions, but it's really, really impacting their wallets. And so I think what we're saying here is that people should have the choice. Their particular racial identity shouldn't dictate the kind of work that they can do, and it shouldn't limit them in terms of their possibilities, professionally or personally.
And Patrice, you say it's not just an American attitude. What can you tell us about your experience when you were growing up in Trinidad?
So yes, born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I've definitely seen stories about this throughout the years. Especially, there's so much discrimination against locks, dreadlocks, as we've called it in the Caribbean traditionally, or braids, just the way that people traditionally have learned to style our hair. There's a Eurocentric standard that has been imposed, I think, across the diaspora, and it's something that we have to examine and try to root out ourselves. And it's discrimination that happens in the schools, it's discrimination that happens in workplaces, and even when people enter the prison system, one of the first things they do is shave off their hair if they have locks, and that's something that still continues in certain Caribbean islands that should be examined and stopped.
Brandis, also, I wanted to add, I run a program in South Africa where students go and they work as journalists. And what's interesting is that even in African countries, this idea of a Eurocentric ideal of how you wear your hair persists. And you would think in a place that's, 80% Black, that people would really, really embrace their natural hair. Now, they do embrace it more than I think we do in the United States. So on television, for example, there you will see all kinds of hairstyles. You will see no hair. You will see head wraps and things like that. So there is, I think, more acceptance of more variety. But even still, in South Africa and in Kenya, where I visited, I've been shocked at the number of weaves, wigs, and just unnatural hair that I've seen worn by, particularly by women there. So I think it, again, just goes to this ideal that somehow or another, there's something wrong with Black hair that's unaltered. And I think what this legislation can do is really begin to change the next generation of all people, not just Black people, because we know that Black people also discriminate against Black people when it comes to how they wear their hair. And that's that internalized racism that makes people think that they are not good enough, that they are not pleasing enough in terms of the way they look. So again, I think this legislation and other kinds of legislation like the Crown Act, those acts and legislation are very important to the future generations.
Right. And you know, Senator Simmonds, before we run out of time, what do you hope, what impact do you hope this bill will have on Black children especially?
You know, I want Black youth to understand that their hair is beautiful. It's an important ingredient of who you are, and you are in control of how you choose to wear your hair. This is such a basic element of freedom, and I want them to understand that that's something that is their provenance, right? And so I, as a state senator, particularly as a historic one who's the first LGBTQ member of the state Senate, intersectional because I'm Black American and Ethiopian, is a very important and visceral message to Black youth that the future is theirs and they are free to wear their hair however they see fit. They are in control of their bodies. And in 2021, I think it's about time that we took that step.
A conversation that we could have all night, but I'm going to have to let you go because we are out of time. My thanks to Ava Thompson Greenwell, Senator Mike Simmonds, and Patrice Grell-Yersick for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The CTA's ambitious overhaul of the red and purple lines on the north side enters its next major phase today. The Bryn Mawr, Berwyn, Argyle, and Lawrence stations are set to shut down until 2024, with temporary stations opening at Bryn Mawr and Argyle. The revamp of the century-old rail system is being overseen by 3 firms, including one that started in a South Side attic and has grown to have national goals. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports.
The $2.1 billion red-purple modernization effort is the single largest project in the CTA's history. For something so massive, the transit agency needed to hire extra hands to oversee the design and construction process.
It's been a huge opportunity for our firm to be a part of this project. So now that we're at this critical moment, you really get to see the design come to life. That's the most exciting part of engineering for me.
Rashad Johnson always had an aptitude for math and science. Speaking of science, he and I are both fully vaccinated. At St. Ignatius, his physics teacher suggested engineering.
And I was like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to drive trains for a living. He's like, not that type of engineering, Rashad.
Johnson took an internship with a construction firm and discovered he loved civil engineering.
Any and everything that has to do with infrastructure. So whether or not it's bridges, roads, buildings, trains, planes, and automobiles, civil engineering has something to do with it.
After college, he was working for a trade association, but Johnson says he always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and he saw an opening. So he started the Roderick Group. Roderick's his middle name.
Started it in my attic on the south side of Chicago, and now we've grown today to 230 people in 5 states of Puerto Rico.
Even as the company, now known as Ardmore Roderick, expands, Johnson says he hasn't forgotten what it was like when the staff was tiny.
I've done the marketing, I've done the PR, I've done the engineering, I've done the design, the construction management, I've taken out the garbage. So now that we've grown into this company where I don't do a lot of this work, I still understand the value.
I really like the environment with Ardmore Roderick. You don't feel that you are like just a number, you know.
Robert Dranizarek was one of the company's very first employees.
Rashad has made an effort to make us diverse, and it's been a real blessing for our company. When you get to know people that have different backgrounds, it really opens your eyes to a lot of things, and you grow as a person, not just as an engineer.
Johnson says he doesn't just want a diverse firm, he wants to help the next wave of engineers like him through working in the community and raising money to get students interested in STEM.
I think minority students, Black kids in particular, seem to be afraid of math and science for some reason. You can't create a love for math and science in high school or college. You have to be a kid who knows and loves math at 5 and 6 and 7 years old. That's where the future engineers come from.
As for Ardmore Roderick's future, Johnson says he wants the company to be nationwide by 2025 and to stay true to its values.
60% of our firm is diverse, and it's very purposeful. We give opportunities for people that typically would not have opportunities in engineering and construction. We have not had a lower quality. In fact, I would tell you we've had better quality because of our commitment to diversity within the firm.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
And by the way, that construction company that Rashad Johnson interned for, it was called Walsh Construction. And it's a massive joint venture. Well, it's massive joint venture. Walsh Floor is the construction firm whose work on the CTA revamp Johnson's company helps oversee. Up next, one-on-one with the new host of Reset on WBEZ. Stay with us. How do Chicago institutions and seats of power work for or at times against the city's residents? That question is one of several at the heart of a new WBEZ series in collaboration with the University of Chicago. The series is called Reimagine Chicago and is hosted by our next guest, who joined WBEZ in December as host of the station's flagship midday show, Reset. And Sasha-Ann Simons joins us now. Welcome, Sasha. I'm excited that you're here, and I know that you recently graduated with a master's degree, so congrats on that as well. Now,
thank you so much.
You bet. Now, I know you've been doing the job as the host of Reset for several months now. Obviously, you knew a lot about Chicago before you arrived here, but what have you learned or what's been surprising in the few months that you've been on the job?
Oh my gosh, what haven't I learned, Brandis? Chicago is an amazing city. It's full of so much excitement, whether good or bad. But I've learned so much about how things work here in this city. I've always looked at Chicago from the outside in, and so I've only heard sort of the top headlines. I've only heard about, the bad rep, the violence. Heard things about Mayor Lightfoot, but didn't quite always understand how things were put together and how exactly that played out. From inside. And so I've learned so much about who's in power here, who's not, and just the different institutions and just different levels of government, how things are working, community residents, different neighborhoods, different foods, just everything. I've definitely taken the time to sort of expand my knowledge about the city because it's a great one. It reminds me a lot of home. I'm from Toronto. And one of the first things I thought of when coming here was just how much this was going to feel like the environment I had grown up in, and it has not disappointed just yet.
There's something new to learn about Chicago every day. I'm still doing it too. Now, you're a reporter and host for WAMU, that's Washington, D.C.'s NPR station. You covered race, identity, and affordability there. How did that knowledge and experience translate into how you'll cover the city of Chicago now?
So that knowledge just helped me realize that a lot of the things that were playing out in Washington, a lot of the things that were playing out in neighborhoods there, and when I say Washington, I mean everything outside the White House, because a lot of people think of, the White House and think of the president and all of that as if that's all that Washington has to offer. But I'm talking about community residents of DC, the District of Columbia. And so things that played out, food insecurity, poverty, maternal mortality, things that were at rampant rates happening there are also playing out here in Chicago. I just really got to expand and open up my lens and just realize in how many ways we're just the same, or the problems, the issues are just the same. And so coming to Chicago was nice to be able to sort of expand that, take that reporting that I learned and that experience in Washington and bring that here. I've brought that lens to Reset as well. Reset was already a show that was focused on these issues, but so far, and I plan to continue magnifying that with the coverage that we focus on. We do we have a lot of conversations that focus on the residents, we focus on the people, we focus on solutions. We're bringing in a lot of voices that you don't normally hear on NPR. That's something that we want to make sure that we continue to do.
And to that end, you all just rolled out a new series in collaboration with the University of Chicago called Reimagine Chicago. How is this series going to sort of dig into the city's operations and institutions?
So it's doing exactly that. It's looking at the institutions and the systems here in Chicago, which have been running for a very long time, and they've been running in a very specific way. And we're asking how could these systems work better? So we're first of all looking at how they work, we're looking at the root, and we're saying, how could they actually work better? We're doing so by looking at our city, we're looking at cities across the country. We're also looking outside of the country, and we're looking at other cities as well. We launched the series last week. I'm so proud to say that we had a wonderful kickoff. We focused last week all on city government, and we talked about how aldermen work, what their role is, what's the role of the mayor, how much power does the mayor have? What is this strong mayor system that Chicago is functioning on? And throughout the series, what's going to be great, Brandis, is we take the information and the ideas that come up. We talk to residents. Chicago residents are so much a part of the conversation, and we take the ideas to public officials as well. So last week, we talked to a longtime alderman. We also talked to the inspector general, and we shared the ideas to get their reactions as well. And the series is going to run throughout the next few months, throughout the summer. We'll go from city government to financial investments. We'll take on public safety, and we'll take on schools in the same manner.
So some of the guests that you've spoken to so far have discussed, as you said, the Chicago mayor's office and the alderman approach to community investment. What are some of the big takeaways from, that was all I think what you focused on last week. What are some of your big takeaways?
So some of our big takeaways, so one of the things I want to mention is when I say that we talked to other cities, we looked at Phoenix, for instance, Phoenix, Arizona. They operate on a weak mayor system, a council manager system, as opposed to our strong mayor system. So their city councilors, or aldermen as we call them here in Chicago, they've got more power than our aldermen here. And they're able to sort of affect change a lot more than ours here. We also looked in my hometown. We talked to folks in Toronto about how city council works there. And some of the big takeaways are that you know, the mayor can be, I don't want to say stripped of certain powers, but there are some ways to reallocate just how things work at City Hall. And there are some ways to get residents more involved and get voices from the community more impacting more of the solutions that basically affect us all. And so there are ways to get more resident input and ways to get aldermen to be able to do more outside of their jurisdictions.
And so there's obviously more to come from Reset with you as you all continue this series. I'm looking forward to hearing it, and I'm glad you were able to join us tonight. Thanks so much to WBEZ's Sasha-Ann Simons.
Thanks, Brandis.
And we're back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. Investigative journalist, civil rights activist, suffragist. Ida B. Wells' legend looms large in Chicago. Whether it was refusing to leave a segregated train car or investigating lynchings in the South, Wells put herself in harm's way to enact change. A new WTTW Chicago Stories special on Wells tells her story through interviews with her descendants, historians, and journalists. The documentary offers a look at her beginnings as a journalist in this sneak peek.
Ida B. Wells was starting to make a name for herself. She took a teaching job in Memphis and joined a lyceum founded by black teachers.
It was a community of sort of thinkers and artists, and she actually took elocution classes, which is speaking classes. And in her diary, she writes about how she was like trying to scrape up the money to pay for her next lesson. And so you wonder, like, what in the world was she preparing herself for? But she was honing her skills.
Each program ended with a reading from The Evening Star, a gossip-filled newspaper which Ida called a spicy journal. She was shocked when asked to start writing for it. As Ida B. Wells first put pen to paper, she found writing to be nothing short of a revelation.
She felt like she could sort of explore more of who she was and express who she was through writing, more than she ever could in teaching.
I wrote in a plain, common-sense way on the things which concerned our people. Knowing that their education was limited, I never used a word of 2 syllables where one would serve the purpose. I signed these articles, Iola.
When Ida B. Wells first starts writing, she was writing about the things that one would expect a woman who's writing for a church publication to write for. But that started to change pretty early on. As a school teacher, Ida starts to document the segregation in the schools and how the Black schools were not getting the same resources and the educational inequities.
She wrote an article in 1889 about the Memphis school system, which is unfortunate because the article could be literally printed today and you wouldn't know the difference.
Ida B. Wells, a Chicago Story special, airs on WTTW on Friday at 8 o'clock. And we'll have much more on the documentary next week on Chicago Tonight as well. And that's our show for this Sunday night. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest news from WTTW. And join Paris Schutz and me tomorrow at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay safe and healthy, and have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.